So in this video, I'm going to be talking to you about how to increase your net worth. And I've met and been around several high net worth individuals who had net worth in excess of a couple of $100 million, and including one of the guys who owns several five-star hotels in UK. And this guy was worth around 500 million pounds. And he had invited me to his house, the house itself was worth around $100 million. It was a 40,000 square feet house in London. So you can think about how big that is for London. And London has small homes, for those of you who have been there. And I've also been in negotiations indirectly with one of the guys whose net worth was in multiple billions. He was a major shareholder of a publicly listed company in India, which had assets, some of the assets in Dubai, healthcare assets, and he wanted to sell them off. And I was negotiating with the CEO of these healthcare assets. And he was reporting directly and reporting what's happening in the discussions, that he's meeting our company, etc. Okay. So, not to mention Dan Pena, I've met him a couple of times. I have done 2 programs with him, the Quantum Leap Advantage and Quantum Leap Advantage Hardcore. This is something if you're just entering the channel. Okay, so let's get started as to how to increase your net worth. First, let's establish what exactly does a net worth mean? Financially and technically, what does it mean? What does it mean that this person is worth XYZ? Well, if you read the financial statements, a financial statement is divided into 3 sections. One is the balance sheet, income statement is the second, and the third is the cash flow statement. And we'll cover the first 2 a little bit to explain what net worth actually means, because if you understand it, then you would know exactly, without a shadow of doubt, how to increase this net worth. And we can perform some analysis of some of the people and analyze what their net worth consists of. So the top part, which is the balance sheet, has assets and liabilities. So if you sell off all the assets and you pay off all the liabilities, what you would have is the net worth of the entire company, individual, etc. So if you take the assets, sell it off, and pay off liability, you will have the net worth. So what are assets? Asset is something tangible or intangible that puts money in your pocket. This helps you. This generates income. Anything that's income producing is an asset. Anything that takes money out of your pocket, that's a liability. So a classic example of an asset is a company which is producing cash flow, a real estate that you have rented out and it's giving you money. That is an asset. And liabilities would be debt. If you have some debt, that's going to be in liabilities. Okay. So you've got assets and liabilities. So there's only one way to increase your net worth. There's really only one, is acquire more assets and make sure that your liabilities don't go beyond your assets. Otherwise, you have a bankruptcy situation. Okay. So assets have to be always more than the liabilities, and you have to constantly acquire assets. If you constantly acquire assets throughout your career, you will be considered rich. So to summarize, the whole game of getting rich is actually the game of acquiring assets. Either you can acquire assets or you can create an asset or build an asset. But ultimately, this is what's going to decide how rich or poor you are: your assets and your liabilities. And as I said, liabilities have to be less than assets always. And if you pay everything, what you have is your net worth. So let's look at an employee. Okay, let's look at someone who is in a position of employment. Normal layman. Forget about the billionaires and people who have got hundreds of millions. Forget about them for a second. Let's analyze what a normal person's balance sheet looks like, their net worth. what's their asset if they are in a job? Their asset is their skills and qualifications. These are the two things that you use to produce income, right? So if your skills and qualifications give you money, that's an intangible asset. Your skills is an intangible asset. So that's, you will put it in the asset column. So what did you do to get these assets? Well, you borrowed money to go to college, or you borrowed money to acquire, invest that skill in to acquire this asset, right? So here on this column, you have the student loan, and here you have a bunch of skills that you developed through that institute, and this produces income. Some of it you pay to, some of the revenue that you generate, income that you generate, you pay towards covering your liability. So that's a very simple structure. So people have one asset on their balance sheet, which is their skills. And after a while, when the education loan is covered, then you buy another asset. It's not really an asset, then you buy a house. Now, does the house produce income if you live in it? If you buy a house with a mortgage and you live in it, it doesn't produce any income. Remember, the definition of an asset, it has to produce income. It doesn't matter if you buy something, it goes up over time. That doesn't matter. Some people say that, okay, if I hold on to the house over time, it's going to go up in value. Doesn't matter. It's still not considered an asset if it takes money out of your pocket. It's not an asset. If you live in the house, you're paying for maintenance and so many other things, and the house in which you live in, that's not really producing any income. So you cannot put your house in the asset column. You could put your house in the liability column. So you have something that you have to pay towards to maintain, and on top of it, your mortgage. So it's really not something that's producing any cash flow. So what you have is the skill, and once you own the house, maybe it could, and then you rent it out, maybe it could be considered asset. But a house is not an asset. That's something that Robert Kiyosaki talks about. It's a very controversial opinion that it's not an asset, because it takes money out of your pocket and it's taking money out of your income. So it's really your skills. And that's most people's life, is their skill is an asset, produces money, and it comes in and goes right out of the window to pay for education loan and mortgage. And you are in this deadlock position where all of your time is going to finance this. And that's what a poor person's balance sheet looks like. A normal person's balance sheet, that's what it looks like. And that's the story of most people. And not only that, to top this up, people get married and have kids, and all of that goes into the liability section, financially speaking. Now, I know it's a controversial opinion. I know it's not justified to look at your wife and kids as a liability, but if it takes money out of your pocket, then that's where you put it, financially. Nothing wrong with it. You have to call a spade a spade. So that's where it goes. So you have so much accumulated liabilities that's draining you and taking all of the time, and you have only one asset here, which is your skills. Which, by the way, with AI and all of this stuff, if you don't keep enhancing your skills, this is under threat constantly. And as other people develop this skill that you have, you are in a dangerous position, because this asset value is going to go down, because it's not going to produce the same amount of money. You may not be able to cover these expenses. And that's the source of anxiety in the world today. That's the source of fear. That's the source of insecurity. That's the source of all the emotions that is going through. And talking to a psychiatrist is not going to help, because this is a financial problem. This is a financial problem which needs to be solved by a financial maneuver. Something needs to change about this structure. You need to restructure things. You need to develop yourself. Maybe you need to enhance your skills to generate more income so that these can be paid for easily. Or you could, if you're really young, you could keep these to the minimum. meaning you should not buy a house, you should not and live in it. You should not get married. You should delay that until you're in a financial position to do it. You should not have kids until you're in a financial position to do it, etc., etc. So it's this intricate dance between assets and liabilities that govern your net worth, and that's most people's life. Okay, solution. There's only one solution, as I mentioned, if you want to increase your net worth, is to acquire assets. Acquire assets. Anytime you spend money on something, you got to evaluate, is this a liability or is this an asset? I'm not talking about food and all of that stuff. That's the basic expenses. Leave that out. But any investment that you make, whether it's a house, a car, whatever it is, you have to evaluate, is this going to put money in my bank account or take money out of my bank account? Some people, they say you should not buy a sports car because it's a liability, etc. It depends on your role and it depends how you use it. Maybe it puts money in your pocket. Some people can get it to a point where it puts money in your pocket. For example, a normal car, if you drive it, it's not an asset. Or if it's a nice car, you get more business, it's an asset. Or it's a normal car and you put it as Uber, you give it out to produce cash flow, that becomes an asset. So it really, whether something is an asset or a liability, it really depends on the person using it and how you use that thing that you buy. That's what really determines. But ultimately, the whole game is about accumulating, acquiring, or creating an asset. Okay, so let's look at Elon Musk's example. He's the richest man in the world. He did not acquire an asset. He's now acquiring assets, but his fundamental asset, Tesla, he created it from scratch. He created that asset. And it took him a long time to create that. SpaceX is an asset which he took a long time for him to create that. So that all of that's an asset. Either you will create, you will accumulate, or you will acquire through various strategies. One of the strategy is, and this is something Robert Kiyosaki talks about, Dan Pena talks about, is you use other people's money to acquire assets that give you income. And you constantly do this. You're engaging constantly in the process of raising capital and acquiring assets, raising capital and acquiring assets, raising capital. And then soon enough, you have asset number one, first business that you buy or first income producing asset, second income producing asset, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, and you have a bunch of assets that's producing cash flow. And every time you acquire an asset, it increases your income. And eventually you can sell these assets because over time the value of the assets go up. And you can sell it and capitalize on it. And then you have a bunch of cash, you can acquire more assets. So in principle, the whole game is about acquiring assets. That's it, period. If you want to get rich, you got to acquire assets. Could be real estate property that produces income. It could be a business. And business is better than real estate. I've made a video on this. If you buy a high margin business and you use bank's money to do it, then you have an asset. And ultimately, the whole game is about how do you use not your money, but the bank's money to acquire cash flow producing assets without putting any money on the table of your own. How do you start gathering these, small $500 to $1 million assets and keep acquiring them using bank's money? If you found a way to do that, then there's no limit to how many assets you can buy because you're not using your money. And banks exist for you to use them to acquire assets. And banks love assets and banks love cash flows. So if you have something that's producing cash flow, you could use bank's money to acquire it and then pay off the loan from that asset, because what you're buying is not a car, and most people take a loan and buy a car, which I don't understand. But because car doesn't produce any income if you are driving it. So if you use the loan to buy a cash flow producing asset and it's self-financed, It's self-finance. It doesn't take any money out of your income or your existing structure. The business itself pays for the loan. Then you can do it any number of times. And you can have any number of assets. And the cost that you would pay to do that would be your time. It takes a lot of time to find the right asset and to finance it. So main cost is your time, which is limited, which is a cost. So you are putting something on the table. It's not money, but it's time. So you're finding the quality assets and you're financing it with the bank. That's how a lot of the people have gotten rich. Now you may ask, a lot of the celebrities have, a lot of high net worth, right? What is their asset? Well, their asset is their brand. They invested a lot of time, build strategic relationships, perform their talent, and they use their talent to get exposure to the public, and that exposure becomes the brand, and then they can introduce different products and generate income from that. So their brand is their biggest asset. Even if somebody doesn't have a house, Taylor Swift doesn't need to have a house because she has a huge audience that she can use to make money. And anything that you can use to make money is an asset, including knowledge, including skills, including abilities, creativity. All of these are also intangible assets. So that's really the summary, is somehow you got to accumulate assets. There are many ways of doing it. One of them is a tool, financial instrument, which is debt. You use debt to accumulate asset, but debt is a liability. So you always have to be very careful with debt, that you're buying something that's far more valuable than the money you spent. And it produces an excess income which can self-finance the debt. So you don't have to put in any money. So if you buy a house, let's say a mortgage, and you put a tenant in that house, but it only covers 50% of the loan and 50% you have to cover with your income, that thing is really not an asset because it's not self-financed. You're actually at net loss. If you did not put your income on the line, it's just the house and the tenant and the bank, the deal is not going to pan out. That's not an asset. You just bought yourself a problem, a liability, which now you have to cover with your existing income. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about buying something that has enough cash flow that it covers the debt service. And if you keep doing that, you'll have a bunch of assets on this column and very little liabilities. And these assets grow in value over time. And when you sell it off, these get sold off at a very high price and you can pay off the debt. And what you have is your net worth. And that's how you increase your net worth, is through acquiring assets while making sure that your liabilities don't over exceed the asset. And that happens when you use these instruments, financial instruments, to buy the right asset at the right price, which have the right amount of cash flow that automatically pays for the debt service. And that's how KKR was formed. That's how BlackRock uses. That's how Robert Kiyosaki, what he does. That's how Grant Cardone, he does what he does. And that's how Dan Pena, who's worth hundreds of millions of dollars, he does, and his mentees do, is acquire assets using debt. The right assets at the right price, at the right cash flow level, and they manage it well, and they walk away with a bunch of money. So that's the video on how to increase your net worth. If you want to learn about how to buy cash flow producing assets, cash flow producing businesses, reach out to me. I've got a mentorship program. I've got a couple of seats left, and let's talk about what can be figured out between us. So click the link below, any of the social media accounts that you see down there, and reach out to me and we'll take it from there.